The night before my father died, I sat on his bed, curled in next to him, the light of a March evening filtering in through the wide window of his hospital room that looked out over the south end of the city with its elevated, twisting highways and abandoned factories. Despite the gray drabness of that time of year, there was something bigger than either of us that sparkled in the air that night. My father had struggled to breathe all that day, but various interventions had come together into a moment of respite. He was able to emerge from the haze of concentration on his own survival long enough for us to have a moment together. I had struggled to say anything of real meaning in the hospital. I'm a crier when it comes to big emotions, and there weren't any other kind in the hospital after his sudden and unexpected diagnosis of lung cancer. My father, maybe a little bit like myself, liked to keep big emotions under wraps, because sometimes when you let them out, it can be hard to get them to go back in again. But that evening, in the dimness of his room, with the sparkling city that we both loved out the window, we had a moment together, and we sat and we talked. I don't really remember everything that we said to each other, but I do know that what I was able to say through the tears that choked my throat were the words, "I'm gonna be okay." And he took my hand and he squeezed it and he said, "I'm gonna be okay too, kiddo." And the thing is, we were both kind of lying. He died the next morning as the sun came up over the river. That kind of lying, that kind of existential lying, where you mix maybe something that's true in with some other things, or maybe, best of all, you manage not to say anything at all, that kind of lying comes naturally to me. In my family, it was sometimes a matter of survival. One of my first memories, or early memories, is of a hotel in Bogota, Colombia. In the mind of my 4 or 5-year-old self, it was absolutely majestic. It was white stucco and bright sunlight and sweeping staircases. I remember my father, Eric, taking me to the market and showing me all the different kinds of fruit, the mangoes and papayas and guavas and the different types of bananas. I remember when we swam to an island off the beach on his back, and maybe there were sea turtles, or maybe we just talked about sea turtles, the way that we talked about all kinds of magical ways in which the world was put together. On that trip, he also introduced me to the idea of privilege for the first time, when he convinced me to give my Holly Hobby doll to the daughter of a drug dealer at the meeting that was probably the point of that entire trip. I have another memory from around the same time. We were returning from one of our trips to Vermont. My father was a laid-back, easygoing person with a twinkling, teasing sense of humor. But when he got serious, I couldn't ignore him. So when he looked at me without the hint of a smile and said, "When we cross the border, if anybody asks you anything at all, don't say a word." And I didn't, for years. When I was 6, we moved to a house in the Eastern Townships on a dirt road, dashing my dreams of being a roller skating waitress. And that's where my father began the endeavor that was to be his until I was 20 and away in university, which was growing very high quality, small batch, organic, as hippie and as wholesome as it was possible to be, marijuana. That was the family business. He was not, as he sometimes told people, a lapidary, a profession that I think he chose because literally no one knows what that is. He did not, as I told people in high school, because I like my lies to be a little bit more believable, work for his family's travel business. And he was no longer, although he had been before I was born, an English teacher, which is what he told the doctors and nurses in the hospital. Every fall, as the light begins to fade earlier in the evening, I become unaccountably anxious. I have a sense memory of standing next to the window of the attic of our house, watching for cars to emerge from the dip in the road that ran past our house, showing that they were just innocently on their way somewhere and not pausing in a way that might be dangerous to us. Fall is a time, as you probably know, when the trees begin to change and the verdant green of the pot plants becomes much easier to spot from the air. It's also when they're more valuable, and so therefore the most vulnerable to theft or other disasters if some wandering hunter or farm kid were to stumble upon them. So every pair of headlights that descended into that dip, that I saw descend into that dip in the road, brought with it a sharp pang of fear that we were going to be discovered and that I would lose everything I knew. Let me pause now to maybe talk about something that might be a little bit more universally relatable, which is the time I almost peed myself on St. Hubert Plaza and then suffered a complete personal crisis about it. It was 2 Christmases after my father's death, so this past one, and it was starting to feel like a little bit of a return to normalcy. Some of you might know the plaza. It's all weird mannequins and unexpected shops, like really, really unexpected shops of every kind, and cafes and bars and little restaurants. But on that Monday afternoon, even right before Christmas, all of the places with easily accessible bathrooms seemed to be closed. And the fast food restaurants all required a purchase to get access to the keys to the bathroom. I found myself wandering in and out of little bakeries and peering longingly through the windows of restaurants, trying to work up my courage. This wasn't an awkwardness over my accent in French, or even an embarrassment over asking to use the bathroom. This was an utter inability to say anything at all. It's a feeling I'm familiar with. I used to get it when I would travel to places I'd never been before, and I'd have to ask for directions. It's like my voice dies in my throat, and I can't even get my body to move to the place that it needs to be to ask the question. But this time, it felt weird and uncomfortable. I am, at this point in my life, a hardcore extrovert. I make my living, as was referenced earlier, talking in front of adolescents. I used to be a high school drama teacher, and you don't know what confident feels like until you have faked it. Doing improv in front of 15-year-olds who can smell fear. And the only thing that you bring to the table as expertise is a master's degree in dramatic literature, not acting or performing. They did not care that I can parse Lacanian psychoanalytic theory, or Judith Butler, or that I have read a phenomenal number of ancient Greek plays. They just wanted to see me jump on a desk in character being ridiculous, and I did. I was born in Montreal, and I've lived most of my life in this province, and I can feel sometimes like both an insider and an outsider. But when I start to feel like I don't belong, even in that neighborhood where my son was born and where I had lived for almost a decade, that childhood fear of being spotted and recognized starts to emerge, and I can feel my body start to tighten in on itself. And my usual voice that carries dies away. Eventually, I remembered the location of the bathroom in the local St. Hubert. And so I turned for relief to the patron saint of rotisserie chicken and parents who cannot get it together to figure out what to have for dinner. By which I mean me. We used to live 2 blocks away from there, and my son is mostly made out of chicken. But I was shaken. I am no longer a painfully shy little girl, or even an awkward homeschooled adolescent, or the 20-something who prided herself on her ability to move through a crowd without being noticed. And I am, most certainly not the kind of woman who pees herself in public because she's afraid to ask to use the bathroom. Once the urgency of the moment had passed, I found myself with this sense of wrongness and frustration that extended beyond the walls of the bathroom in the back hall of the Saint-Hubert with its little bits of toilet paper on the floor, beyond the employees at the front of the restaurant that I was going to have to walk past with the nonchalance of a woman who did not just sneak in to use the bathroom, and who most certainly, again, I just want to point this out, is not the kind of woman who pees herself in public. For full transparency, I actually should probably point out that I am completely the kind of woman who would pee herself in public. It's just usually for different reasons. And that is the moment that I decided to do this, to tell this story here in front of you guys. Because the thing is, inside my family, unlike out in the world, I was never told that I didn't have the right to say whatever I wanted to and to take up space. My father showed how pleased and proud he was of me every time we spoke, whether it was about sea turtles or privilege or the fruit at the market or increasingly his favorite topic, that chicken-loving son of mine. When he told the doctors and nurses in the hospital that he'd been an English teacher, it hurt my heart. Not because it wasn't true, he had been an English teacher, as am I, but because it wasn't the whole truth. He was so much more than that. He was a pirate and an outlaw, and he took insane risks and sailed past the rocks, both literally and figuratively, with breathtaking frequency. And I wanted him to be seen the way that he saw me, fully and magnificently. I like to think that when my father and I lied to each other in the hospital, we told a kind of truth when we tried to be okay for each other. I know that he would want me to be okay, that he would want me to be able to speak hard truths and to make my own brave, rule-breaking decisions. And so I'm learning to tell his stories out loud, and my own, and to trust that I will be okay, even when they make me stand out and easier to spot.